My landlord said I was lying about the mold problem, so I invited the health inspector to our next meeting. When I moved into the basement apartment on Crescent Street, Dimitri assured me the black spots on the bathroom ceiling were just old water stains. Cosmetic only, he said, with that dismissive wave landlord's perfect. Previous tenant was messy with shower. 3 months later, I was coughing blood. The spots had spread across my bedroom wall like a constellation of death. My clothes smelled perpetually musty. I'd wake up wheezing, my throat raw and burning. When I showed Dimitri photos, he laughed. You Americans, always complaining, is nothing. I started documenting everything. Photos with timestamps, videos of water dripping through the ceiling during rainstorms. I kept a symptom diary and got medical records showing my declining lung function. When I demanded he fix it, Dimitri's tone shifted. You make problems where no problems exist, he said. Maybe you find new place if you so unhappy. That's when I called the health department. Inspector Vaughn was everything Dimitri wasn't. Thorough, professional, and genuinely concerned. During our phone consultation, I explained the situation while taking more photos of the expanding mold colonies. I'd like to be present when you inspect, I said. That's unusual, but not prohibited, Vaughn replied. When's your next meeting with the landlord? I smiled for the first time in weeks. Thursday at noon. Dimitri arrived exactly on time, coffee in hand, wearing his usual condescending smirk. He launched into his prepared speech about how I was a problem tenant before noticing the stranger sitting at my kitchen table. This is Inspector Vaughn from the county health department, I said sweetly. Dimitri's face went white. The coffee mug slipped from his fingers, shattering on the linoleum floor. There is no problem here, he stammered. She is lying. Vaughn pulled out his testing kit. We'll see about that. What happened next was beautiful. Vaughn's equipment detected toxic levels of black mold throughout the apartment. He swabbed samples, photographed everything, and documented code violations I hadn't even known existed. Dimitri followed him around like a lost puppy, making increasingly desperate excuses. The previous tenant never complained, he insisted. The previous tenant, I said quietly, died of lung cancer 6 months after moving out. Vaughn stopped mid-measurement. How do you know that? I pulled out my laptop. I found her obituary. Turned out she'd tried to break her lease early due to health concerns. Dimitri threatened to sue her. For the next hour, I watched years of Dimitri's negligence unravel. Vaughn issued immediate violation notices. The apartment was condemned. Dimitri owed me thousands in damages. As Vaughn packed his equipment, he handed me his card. I'll need that obituary and any other information about previous tenants. Later that night, I was researching Dimitri's other properties when I found something that made my blood run cold. 7 apartments, 4 suspicious tenant deaths in the past 3 years, all respiratory related. And tomorrow, I had a meeting scheduled with the family. The first family arrived at the coffee shop on Cedar Avenue exactly at 10. Beatrice Holloway was in her 70s, walking with a cane, her eyes red-rimmed from what I suspected were sleepless nights that had nothing to do with age. Her daughter Francine followed close behind, clutching a manila folder against her chest like armor. You said you had information about my husband's death, Beatrice said without preamble, as she lowered herself into the booth. Walter died last October. I slid a printed copy of my research across the table. He lived in Unit 2B on Maple Street, Dmitri Kozlov's property. Francine opened the folder and pulled out medical records. Dad started having breathing problems 3 months after they moved in. Doctor said it was just his age catching up with him. The apartment had black mold, I said. Just like mine, just like all of them. Beatrice's cane clattered to the floor. We asked the landlord about those dark patches in the bathroom. He said they were water stains. Cosmetic only, I quoted, and watched both women's faces crumble with recognition. That's exactly what he told us, Francine whispered. I opened my laptop and showed them the spreadsheet I'd been building. 7 properties, 12 units total. Each one had a documented mold problem based on tenant complaints I'd found buried in city records. Each one had tenants who developed respiratory issues. 4 had died. Walter was the 3rd, I continued. There was Dolores Montgomery in Unit 4A on Elm Street, died of pulmonary fibrosis in June. Before that, Timothy Chen in the basement apartment on Oak Avenue, pneumonia complications in March. Beatrice gripped her daughter's hand. We should have fought harder when Walter got sick. We should have known. You couldn't have known, I said. Dimitri's been hiding this for years, but now we can prove it. The coffee shop door chimed, and 2 more people walked in. I recognized them from the Facebook profiles I'd found, David Montgomery and his wife Patricia, Dolores' son and daughter-in-law. Within 20 minutes, the booth was full. Timothy Chen's widow, Eileen, had brought her teenage son. The family of another tenant who'd gotten sick but survived sat at the adjacent table. By 11:30, we'd moved to the community center's meeting room. I started documenting everything 6 months before Mama died, David said, spreading photographs across the table. Look at these mold patterns. They're identical to what you showed us. Patricia nodded. The health inspector who came after her funeral said the mold levels were off the charts. But by then it was too late. Eileen's son, who couldn't have been more than 16, spoke up. My dad tried to break the lease early. The landlord threatened to sue us for everything we had. The pattern was becoming clear. Dimitri targeted vulnerable tenants, elderly people, immigrants, single parents, anyone who wouldn't fight back or couldn't afford lawyers. He'd rent them moldy apartments, dismiss their health complaints, and threaten legal action if they tried to leave. "We need to take this to the police," Francine said. "I already called Detective Ramirez," I replied. "She's meeting us here in an hour." What I didn't tell them was that I'd also been in contact with Channel 7's investigative team, the State Attorney General's office, and a personal injury lawyer who specialized in landlord negligence cases. Detective Ramirez arrived with a thick folder and a grim expression. She listened as each family shared their story, taking notes and asking detailed questions about timelines and medical records. "This is going to be a complex investigation," she said finally. "We're looking at potential charges of criminal negligence, reckless endangerment, maybe even manslaughter. But I need more evidence." "I can get you more evidence," I said. That afternoon, I called Dimitri and told him I wanted to discuss settling our dispute privately. We arranged to meet at his office the next morning. What he didn't know was that I'd be wearing a wire. The building housing Dimitri's property management company was as run down as his apartments. Peeling paint, broken windows, and a distinct smell of mildew in the hallways. I found his office on the second floor, door slightly ajar, and knocked. Come in, Dimitri called out. He was sitting behind a cluttered desk, smoking a cigarette despite the no-smoking sign on the wall. "So, you want to be reasonable now?" I sat down and activated the recording app on my phone, keeping it hidden in my purse. "I'm willing to drop the health department complaint in exchange for my moving expenses and security deposit." Dimitri laughed, a harsh sound that triggered my cough reflex. "You think you have leverage? I deal with complainers like you all the time." "What do you mean?" "These tenants. They always find something wrong. Black spots on wall, little bit of dampness, some coughing. Americans are so soft." He took a long drag of his cigarette. "Previous tenant in your unit, she also complained. Made big fuss about nothing. What happened to her?" Dimitri shrugged. "She moved out. Problem solved." I leaned forward. "She died, Dimitri. Lung cancer. Not my problem. People die all the time. 4 of your tenants have died from respiratory problems in the past 3 years. His cigarette froze halfway to his mouth. "You've been talking to other tenants." "I've been talking to their families." Dimitri's eyes narrowed. "You better be careful. I have good lawyers. I sue you for harassment, for defamation. I make your life very difficult. Like you made their lives difficult? I provide affordable housing to people who nobody else wants. Old people, foreigners, people with bad credit. They should be grateful." "Grateful for toxic mold that killed them?" Dimitri stubbed out his cigarette aggressively. "You prove nothing. Mold is everywhere. People get sick. They die. Is life. The health inspector documented dangerous levels in my apartment. Health inspector makes mistakes. I know judges. I know city council. These things can be reconsidered." My blood ran cold at the implication. "Are you saying you can make the violations disappear?" "I'm saying I've been in business long time. I know how things work in this city." I forced myself to stay calm, to keep him talking. "How many other tenants have complained about mold?" "Too many. Is why I raise security deposits. When they complain too much, I keep deposit for cleaning fees, repair costs. They want to fight? I have lawyers. They have nothing." "What about the ones who died?" Dimitri's face darkened. "Old Chinese man, he was dying anyway. Had bad cough when he moved in. Old black woman, she was heavy smoker. Her family tried to blame me, but coroner said natural causes. These people, they look for someone to blame for their problems." I thought about Eileen's husband, about Beatrice's Walter, about all the families sitting in that meeting room yesterday. Natural causes? People die. I don't make them die. But if they're going to die anyway, at least they have place to live first. The callousness in his voice was staggering. I kept the conversation going for another 20 minutes, getting him to detail his methods for intimidating tenants, his connections with city officials, and his complete disregard for their health and safety. When I finally left his office, my hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold my phone, but I had everything we needed. Detective Ramirez met me at the police station to review the recording. She listened to the entire 40-minute conversation with growing amazement. "This is gold," she said. "He basically confessed to criminal negligence and admitted to bribing officials. We can use this to get warrants for his business records, his other properties, everything. What happens next? Next, we build a case that'll put him away for a long time." The local news picked up the story 2 days later. Slumlord's toxic trail of death ran as the lead story on Channel 7's evening broadcast. They interviewed me, several of the families, Inspector Vaughn, and even managed to ambush Dimitri outside his office. His response was to curse at the camera in what sounded like 3 different languages before shoving the reporter and storming inside. That footage went viral. Within a week, more victims started coming forward. Tenants from properties we hadn't even identified yet. Former residents who'd moved away but remembered getting sick. Families of people who died but never connected their deaths to their housing conditions. The district attorney announced that her office would be conducting a comprehensive investigation into Dimitri's entire property portfolio. The city launched an emergency inspection of all his buildings. The health department started testing air quality in every unit he owned. What they found was worse than I'd imagined. 23 properties, 47 units. Every single one had some level of mold contamination. 17 had dangerous levels that required immediate evacuation. 5 had structural damage so severe they were condemned on the spot. and the death toll kept rising. We'd initially identified 4 deaths. The investigation revealed 11 more, people who'd lived in Dimitri's apartments and died of respiratory complications over the past 5 years. The medical examiner's office agreed to review each case. Dimitri tried to flee the country. Airport security found him at customs with a bag full of cash and a one-way ticket to Moldova. Detective Ramirez arrested him right there at the gate. The footage made the national news. The trial started 8 months later. I testified for 3 hours, walking the jury through my documentation process, playing the recorded conversation, and explaining how the mold in my apartment had nearly killed me. The families of the deceased testified about watching their loved ones waste away, while Dimitri dismissed their concerns. The prosecution presented evidence showing that Dimitri had been warned about mold problems for years, but had chosen to ignore them to save money. They proved he'd bribed building inspectors to overlook violations. They demonstrated a pattern of targeting vulnerable tenants who wouldn't fight back. Dimitri's defense attorney tried to argue that the deaths were coincidental, that my clients were old or had pre-existing conditions. But the medical testimony was damning. Forensic pathologists explained how prolonged exposure to toxic mold could trigger fatal respiratory conditions, even in healthy people. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours. Guilty on 15 counts of criminal negligence, guilty on 3 counts of involuntary manslaughter, guilty on 11 counts of reckless endangerment, guilty on 7 counts of bribery and corruption. The judge sentenced him to 25 years in prison. But the criminal trial was just the beginning. The civil lawsuits started while Dimitri was still awaiting sentencing. I'd connected the families with Rhonda Blackwood, a personal injury attorney who specialized in toxic exposure cases. She filed a class action suit on behalf of everyone who'd been harmed by Dimitri's negligence. The discovery process revealed even more shocking details. Internal emails where Dimitri joked about his sicky tenants. Financial records showing he'd saved hundreds of thousands of dollars by ignoring mold remediation. Insurance claims he'd filed for water damage while simultaneously telling tenants there was no mold problem. Most damning were the photographs. Dimitri had been documenting the mold problems himself, not to fix them, but to track which units generated the most complaints. He had detailed records of every black spot, every ceiling stain, every health complaint. He'd been using this information to refine his targeting of vulnerable tenants. The civil trial lasted 3 months. When it was over, the jury awarded $47 million in damages to be split among the victims and their families. Dimitri didn't have $47 million, but he did have properties. The court ordered the liquidation of his entire real estate portfolio. Every building, every unit, every scrap of property he owned went up for auction. The proceeds would go to compensate his victims. I watched from the courthouse steps as Dimitri's empire was dismantled piece by piece. The Crescent Street basement where I'd nearly died sold for $180,000. The Maple Street building where Walter Holloway had breathed his last sold for $340,000. One by one, every property that had housed his victims found new owners. The city used the case to overhaul its building inspection process. They hired more inspectors, increased penalties for violations, and created a tenant protection hotline. They passed the Kozlov law requiring mandatory mold testing in all rental properties and giving tenants the right to break leases immediately if dangerous conditions are discovered. But the real victory came 18 months after Dimitri's conviction. I was walking past the Crescent Street building when I saw a small crowd gathered outside. A young family was moving into what had been my basement apartment. The father was carrying boxes while 2 small children ran circles around their mother. I recognized the woman, Patricia Montgomery, Dolores' daughter-in-law. She'd used her portion of the settlement to buy the building and convert it into safe, affordable housing. The whole place has been completely renovated, she told me as her kids played in the front yard. New ventilation system, mold remediation, everything up to code. We're calling it Montgomery House. I walked through the apartment I'd once thought would kill me. New drywall, fresh paint, proper ventilation, and most importantly, no black spots anywhere. Every unit is going to families who need affordable housing but can't find safe places to live, Patricia continued. We're working with the health department to do quarterly inspections. Never again. 3 years later, I still live in the city. My new apartment is on the 3rd floor of a well-maintained building where the landlord actually responds to maintenance requests. My lungs have healed completely, though I still get nervous around water stains. I keep in touch with most of the families from the case. Beatrice Holloway passed away last year, but she lived to see Dimitri imprisoned and her granddaughter graduate from law school with plans to become a tenant rights attorney. Eileen Chen's son is studying public health with a focus on environmental safety. David Montgomery started a nonprofit that provides free mold testing to low-income tenants. Inspector Vaughn still works for the health department, but now he heads up the new residential safety division created in response to our case. He calls me occasionally when he encounters landlords who remind him of Dimitri. You know what the difference is now, he told me during one of these calls. The landlords are scared. Word gets around. Nobody wants to be the next Kozlov case. I've become something of a local expert on tenant rights. People call me when they're dealing with negligent landlords. I help them document problems, connect them with inspectors, and find legal representation when necessary. Last month, I helped a college student get out of a lease after discovering asbestos in her dorm-style apartment. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I just moved out when Dimitri first dismissed my mold complaints. If I'd been another quiet victim who found somewhere else to live and never fought back. Walter Holloway might still be alive. Dolores Montgomery might have seen her grandson graduate. Timothy Chen might have watched his son go to college. But I've learned that some fights choose you. The morning I coughed up blood in that moldy basement, I could have gone to urgent care, gotten treated, and found a new apartment. Instead, I got angry. I got methodical. And I got evidence. Dmitry Kozlov thought he could dismiss me, like he'd dismissed dozens of other tenants. He thought my complaints were just noise he could ignore until I gave up and moved away. He was counting on my silence, my compliance, my willingness to accept that this was just how things were for people like me. He was wrong. Sometimes the system works exactly the way it's supposed to. Sometimes documentation matters. Sometimes the truth is enough. Sometimes justice is not only possible but inevitable, but only if someone is willing to fight for it. Last week, I got a call from a tenant in Seattle who'd seen the documentary about our case. She was living in an apartment with what looked like mold. Her landlord was dismissing her concerns, and she didn't know what to do. Start documenting everything, I told her. Take photos with timestamps, keep a symptom diary, get medical records, and whatever you do, don't let them convince you that you're making problems where none exist. What if the landlord retaliates? Then you document that too. And you remember that their retaliation is evidence of their guilt. I could hear her writing down everything I was saying. The most important thing, I continued, is that you're not fighting this alone. Find the other tenants. Find the families of people who got sick. Build a community of witnesses. When you speak together, they can't dismiss all of you. She thanked me before hanging up, but I was the one who should have been grateful. Every person who refuses to accept negligence, who documents problems instead of suffering in silence, who fights back instead of moving away, they're all part of the same movement. We're the people who say that housing shouldn't make you sick, that landlords can't profit from other people's suffering, that even if you're poor, even if you're old, even if you're foreign or different or vulnerable, you still deserve to breathe clean air in your own home. Dmitry Kozlov will die in prison. His properties have been sold and renovated. The families he destroyed have found some measure of justice and compensation. But his legacy isn't the buildings he owned or the people he killed. His legacy is the army of tenant advocates he inadvertently created, the new laws bearing his name, the inspection protocols that now protect thousands of renters across the state. His legacy is the knowledge that if you try to profit from people's suffering, if you dismiss their pain and ignore their health, if you think your wealth and connections make you untouchable, someone like me might be taking notes. Someone like me might have a camera. Someone like me might know a health inspector. And someone like me might just be angry enough to bring your whole world down. Every time I walk past Montgomery House and see families living safely in what used to be Dimitri's slum, I'm reminded that the most powerful thing you can do when someone tells you to be quiet is to get louder. When someone tells you you're making problems where none exist, make sure everyone can see the problems. When someone tells you that's just how things are, show them how things could be. And when someone tries to make you another silent victim, choose instead to become the witness who speaks for everyone who can't speak for themselves. Because the truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deep they try to bury it, just like mold.